Chapter 8. The Growing Shadow. The kingdom had been announced in parables of seeds and leaven, in gestures of compassion and in the presence of friendship. Yet even as hearts awakened, the structures of power began to tremble. For truth unsettles what lives by control, and love exposes what thrives on fear. The shadow that had long hidden in silence now began to gather form. It began with whispers. Pharisees questioned his words, not with openness, but with suspicion. Scribes scrutinized his healings, not to rejoice in restoration, but to accuse him of breaking Sabbath. Priests saw the crowd swelling, not with hunger for God, but with perceived threat to their own authority. Power fears what it cannot control, and Jesus could not be controlled. His freedom unsettled their chains. His compassion unraveled their hierarchies. His authority, rooted in presence rather than position, made their thrones tremble. The Urantia papers reveal that this mounting opposition was no accident but inevitability. Light and shadow cannot coexist without tension. Where the living truth advances, crystallized power resists. The shadow grew because it had to. Truth reveals what is false, and falsehood clings desperately to survival. What Jung saw in the psyche, shadow resisting the self, was mirrored in history as institutions recoiled against the light that unveiled their distortions. The Pharisees embodied this resistance. They were not evil in intent, but imprisoned in system. Their devotion to the law had calcified into obsession. Their pursuit of holiness turned into instrument of control. In them we see what Hannah Arendt would later call the banality of evil. Not monstrous cruelty, but ordinary conformity, a blindness sustained by habit and fear. They upheld rules while ignoring love, defended purity while neglecting compassion, enforced order while silencing truth. They were not villains in their own eyes. They were guardians of tradition. And yet, in defending their system, they opposed the very God they claimed to serve. The Gnostics would name such forces arcanis, powers that imprison the soul under the guise of authority. These powers are not always cosmic rulers. They are also psychological and social mechanisms, the invisible chains of conformity and fear. Jesus confronted these archontic powers not with weapons, but with truth spoken, with presence lived. Each time he healed on the Sabbath, each time he sat with sinners, each time he placed compassion above ritual, he revealed the impotence of these powers. The shadow grew because its mask was falling. Crowds, too, were divided. Some were drawn by his words of life. Others followed out of curiosity, waiting for spectacle. Some felt freedom stirring within. Others feared what it might demand of them. For the kingdom was gift, but it was also call. It asked for courage, for release of control, for surrender to love. Many were willing to admire, but fewer were willing to follow when admiration required transformation. The shadow was not only in institutions, it lingered in every hesitant heart. And Jesus knew. He walked with serenity into the growing tension, never naive about where it would lead. His words became sharper, his parables more urgent. He confronted hypocrisy with fearless clarity, not to humiliate, but to awaken. Yet the more he revealed, the more resistance hardened. The shadow, once vague, now began to take the shape of plots and schemes. Behind the smiles of polite debate lurked the clenched fists of fear. Urantia had seen rebellion before. Lucifer's manifesto of false freedom, Caligastia's betrayal of trust. Now the same pattern repeated in miniature. Truth met distortion. Light met shadow. Freedom met control. The cosmic battle played out in the narrow streets of Jerusalem, in whispered councils, in calculated questions meant to trap. The forgotten world was once more the stage where eternity and time collided. Yet Jesus did not retreat. To retreat would have been to let shadow define reality. He continued to teach, to heal, to love. His courage was not the courage of defiance, but of fidelity, faithfulness to the Father's will, unshaken by threat. This is what made him dangerous to power. He could not be manipulated by fear. Empires thrive on fear, but what can they do with a man who walks free of it? The shadow grew, but so did the light. Each confrontation revealed more clearly the contrast between truth and distortion. Each plot exposed the fragility of the systems that sought to silence him. And in every act of resistance, the courage of Jesus shone brighter, preparing his companions and even the world for the path ahead. The whispers became questions, and the questions became traps. No longer content to grumble in private, the leaders brought their opposition into the open. In marketplaces and synagogues, in temple courts and crowded streets, they challenged him with words sharpened like blades. By what authority do you do these things? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Should we pay taxes to Caesar? These were not sincere inquiries, but snares designed to corner him, to force him into contradiction, to reduce his living truth to a legal puzzle. Yet Jesus answered with clarity that disarmed even as it unsettled. When asked about paying tribute to Rome, he lifted a coin and pointed to its image. Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. With a single sentence, he dissolved the trap, honoring civic duty while affirming the sovereignty of the soul. But such answers did more than silence accusers. They revealed their motives. Each time he escaped their net, their frustration deepened, their resentment hardened. The shadow was not only in leaders, it seeped into the crowds. At first, many followed out of admiration, drawn by healings, captivated by his words. But admiration is fragile when fear is stirred. The authorities whispered warnings. He deceives the people. Rome's representatives muttered threats. Disturbances will not be tolerated. Neighbors began to wonder, would following him mean trouble with the priests? With the soldiers? The warmth of enthusiasm began to chill under the weight of suspicion. This is how shadow works. It does not always arrive with thunder and armies. More often it seeps like fog, spreading doubt, stirring fear, convincing ordinary hearts to step back, to remain silent, to choose safety over truth. Hannah Arendt would later name it with piercing precision, the banality of evil. The tragedy is not always the cruelty of a few, but the compliance of the many, who quietly yield to systems of distortion. In Jesus' time, this compliance became visible in the hesitation of those who once cheered, now watching from a distance, afraid of association. The Urantia papers describe this mounting tension with clarity. His teachings cut through hypocrisy, but each cut drew deeper hostility. The cleansing of the temple, his declaration that commerce had corrupted prayer, enraged the priestly class. His open compassion for outcasts undermined the hierarchies that defined worthiness. His insistence that the Father's love was universal threatened those who thrived on exclusivity. Each act of freedom revealed the emptiness of their control, and each revelation summoned their fury. Psychologically, this was the shadow in full display. Jung taught that what is repressed emerges with greater force. Institutions that repressed compassion erupted in hostility when confronted with it. Leaders who denied their own hunger for God disguised it with zeal for law. Their shadow, unacknowledged, projected itself onto Jesus. They accused him of blasphemy, of lawlessness, of possession by dark powers, accusations that revealed more of their own blindness than his. And yet, through it all, he remained fearless. He did not match hostility with hostility, nor retreat into silence. Instead, he exposed the mechanisms of fear with serenity. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Freedom was his weapon, love his shield, truth his unshakable ground. Power could not trap him, for he refused the game of power altogether. His authority was not derived from position, but from presence, not enforced by fear, but embodied in love. Still, the shadow thickened. The councils whispered in secret, plotting his downfall. The temple hierarchy saw their influence waning. Rome watched uneasily, wary of unrest. Even among his closest companions, fear crept in. Judas, troubled by disillusion and ambition, began to lean toward betrayal. The shadow was no longer only external. It reached into the very circle of friendship, testing loyalty, exposing fragility. The forgotten world once again stood at a crossroads. Would it choose the courage of truth or the safety of conformity? Would it embrace the light or yield to the shadow? In every heart, the same drama played out. Admiration struggling with fear, freedom contending with control, love confronting suspicion. The Battle of Urantia was not fought with armies, but within the soul of each person who encountered him. And in that battle, courage was the dividing line. To stand with him meant to stand against systems, against fear, against the tide of shadow. Few found the strength. Many stepped back. Yet even this was foreseen, for the shadow had to reach its fullness before it could be dispelled. Darkness grows thickest before dawn. The days in Jerusalem carried a weight unlike any before. The city, swollen with pilgrims for the Passover, became the stage where the currents of light and shadow would clash. Every street echoed with expectation. Every courtyard hummed with rumor. Some whispered of a prophet who spoke like no other, some of the Messiah who might defy Rome, others of a blasphemer whose words endangered the nation. The air itself seemed divided, heavy with unseen tension. Jesus entered not with an army, but with a donkey, fulfilling ancient prophecy, yet confounding every political hope. Crowds laid branches before him, crying, "Hosanna!" Yet within the same city walls, councils gathered in secrecy, plotting his death. It was as though the collective psyche of Urantia, scarred by rebellion and craving freedom, could not decide whether to crown him or to crucify him. Jung would call this the eruption of the shadow, the unconscious forces, long repressed, breaking through in contradiction and confusion. The confrontation became explicit in the temple courts. Jesus overturned the tables of money changers, declaring, "My Father's house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." This act tore the mask from the priestly system. Would have been tolerated as normal. The blending of commerce with worship was revealed for what it was: corruption. Here Arendt's insight finds resonance. The banality of evil thrives in what is accepted as ordinary. Jesus shattered that ordinariness, and by doing so exposed the shadow festering beneath it. From that moment, the leaders no longer debated how to silence him. They only debated how soon. The shadow had hardened into resolve. Every word he spoke was watched, every parable twisted into accusation, every gesture of compassion reinterpreted as rebellion. To the fearful, his freedom looked like chaos. To the powerful, his truth looked like threat. To the compromised, his presence was unbearable. And yet, his courage did not waver. He taught in parables of vineyards and tenants, of rejected stones becoming the cornerstone. Each story pierced deeper, unveiling not only the hypocrisy of leaders, but the destiny of truth itself. That rejection cannot extinguish what God has chosen. The more they sought to silence him, the more his words revealed the futility of their schemes. The crowds, once enthusiastic, now wavered. Some still clung to hope, but others grew restless. Rome's presence was heavy in the city, soldiers patrolling with suspicion. Fear spread like contagion. To follow him might mean conflict, to defend him might invite punishment. The shadow was not only in councils, it crept into the hearts of the many, turning admiration into hesitation and hesitation into distance. Among his disciples, the atmosphere darkened as well. Peter vowed loyalty, yet trembled at the thought of persecution. James and John, once eager for glory, now struggled with doubt. Judas, disillusioned, sought opportunity to turn against him. Friendship itself, the heart of his ministry, was being tested by the weight of shadow. The closer the cross drew, the more fragile human loyalty revealed itself to be. Yet Jesus walked forward with serenity. He knew the shadow must rise to fullness before it could be dispelled. He predicted betrayal without bitterness, foretold denial without condemnation, and spoke of suffering without fear. His courage was not defiance, but fidelity. Fidelity to truth, to love, to the Father's will. He embodied the paradox that ultimate strength is found in surrender, that victory lies not in avoiding the shadow, but in walking through it. In these final days, Jerusalem became the mirror of the cosmos. The rebellion of Lucifer echoed in the priest's scheming, in Rome's suspicion, in Judas' betrayal, in the crowd's wavering. But the fidelity of the sun shone brighter than the darkness. The forgotten world once more bore the weight of cosmic drama. Would shadow prevail, or would light break through? The answer was not yet given, but the stage was set. The shadow had grown dense, thick with fear and accusation. The city that sang, Hosanna, now muttered a blasphemy. The temple that should have welcomed truth now plotted against it. The friends who swore loyalty now trembled in doubt. All was prepared for the night of Gethsemane, where the full measure of the shadow would confront the full fidelity of the sun. The shadow had swollen to its full stature. What began as whispers now roared in the councils of the powerful, echoed in the fear of the crowds, and trembled even in the hearts of friends. Yet this growth of darkness was itself part of the mystery. Light reveals shadow, and in being revealed, the shadow hastens its own collapse. The more fiercely the powers resisted, the more clearly their emptiness was exposed. Truth had entered the city, and truth will always divide. It unmasks illusions, strips away masks, and calls every soul to choose. Some drew nearer, touched by his compassion, awakened by his words. Others recoiled, clinging to safety, to systems, to shadows that felt familiar. The kingdom was no longer a hidden seed, but an unveiled confrontation. Love against fear, freedom against control, truth against distortion. Jung's vision of the shadow resonates here. The collective darkness of Israel and of humanity surged in response to the light of the sun. What had been repressed emerged with violence. Envy disguised as zeal, fear cloaked as piety, control masked as law. Yet in each expression of opposition, it was not Jesus who was unmasked, but the world itself. The shadow was revealed, not to glorify it, but to expose it, to prepare for its transfiguration. The Gnostic image of the arcanes also fits. Powers that imprison, guardians of false order, resisting liberation. They sat in council robes, wielded scrolls of law, carried spears of empire. Yet their authority was hollow, for the true sovereign walked among them as a friend, and no prison can bind the soul awakened to the Father's love. The shadow could scheme, but it could not alter reality. The kingdom was already here, already spreading in hearts, already indestructible. Even the angels watched with awe. To them, this was not merely a conflict of city and prophet, but the reenactment of cosmic drama. They had seen Lucifer's rebellion. They had witnessed the long exile of Urantia. Now they watched their sovereign confront the concentrated shadow, not with armies of light, but with fidelity of love. And they knew the outcome was assured, not because force would prevail, but because truth cannot die. Still, the path forward was not ease, but agony. Jesus knew that friendship would falter, that betrayal would come, that denial would wound him more deeply than whips or nails. He knew the garden of decision awaited, where shadow would press against him not only from without, but from within. The temptation to flee, to despair, to abandon the cup. The courage required was not to fight, but to yield, not to conquer, but to remain faithful. And this is the lesson for every soul. The shadow must be faced, not denied. It grows in silence, festers in repression, but loses power when brought into light. Jesus walked into the swelling darkness, not to avoid it, but to transfigure it. His path is the path of all who seek truth, to meet the shadow with courage, to let love endure even when betrayed, to trust that dawn is hidden within the darkest night. Thus the chapter closes with the city poised, the councils resolved, the disciples uncertain, the world holding its breath. The shadow has grown, but it has not won. Its growth is the sign that light has come near, that truth has drawn too close to be ignored. And so, into this thick night, the beloved Son walks freely. The next step is the garden. There, under olive branches, the final choice will be made. The shadow will press with all its weight, but sovereignty will be surrendered, and in surrender, victory will begin. Chapter 9, Gethsemane, the surrender of sovereignty. The night was heavy with silence, and the olive trees bore witness to a struggle no eye could fully behold. Gethsemane was not battlefield, but garden, not filled with clashing swords, but with the weight of decision. Here, under branches that had sheltered generations, the beloved Son entered the deepest chamber of human anguish. The kingdom he proclaimed, the friendships he had nurtured, the truths he had revealed, all converged upon this hour. Sovereignty itself would be tested, not in the language of power, but in the language of surrender. The Urantia papers describe this moment as the climax of his earthly mission. It was not the nails of the cross that defined his victory, but the choice made in Gethsemane. For sovereignty is not measured by domination, but by fidelity, not by escape, but by endurance, not by will imposed, but by will surrendered. The Father's plan lay before him, not as vision of glory, but as cup of suffering. To drink it meant embracing misunderstanding, betrayal, denial, cruelty. To refuse it meant preserving life, but forfeiting truth. The anguish was real. He who had healed others now trembled with the weight of humanity's brokenness. He who had spoken with serene authority now confessed, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow, even to death." The Son of Man, in his full humanity, felt the crushing weight of fear and loneliness. Yet in that very anguish lay the depth of his solidarity with us all. Every soul that has walked through its own night of despair finds here its mirror. Even the beloved trembled. Even he pleaded for another way. This is the mortificatio of alchemy, the death before transmutation, the breaking of the vessel, so that gold may emerge. In Gethsemane, the ego's last defenses dissolve. The desire to flee, to preserve, to control, must die so that a deeper fidelity may live. Jesus entered this alchemical crucible not as distant sovereign, but as vulnerable man, allowing the fire of anguish to strip him bare until only trust remained. Mystics call it the dark night of the soul. In such a night, all consolations vanish, all certainties evaporate, and one stands naked before silence. It is not punishment but purification, not abandonment but invitation. In the absence of light, one learns to trust the source beyond sight. Jesus lived this night fully. His prayers were not triumphal declarations but cries of honest pain. If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. And yet, the night revealed its secret when he added, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Here lies the surrender of sovereignty, not resignation, but trust, not defeat, but fidelity. Zen speaks of emptiness not as void, but as fullness beyond form. To sit in the silence of Gethsemane is to face that emptiness. Ego dissolves, plans collapse, illusions fall away. What remains is the stillness that cannot be shaken, the trust that does not demand understanding. Jesus entered that stillness, beyond anguish, beyond fear, beyond desire for escape. He touched the ground of being where the Father's presence is enough. The garden became Zendo, a place where surrender unveiled infinite strength. Even his companions could not share the weight. Peter, James, and John, closest to his heart, fell asleep, unable to watch even an hour. Their failure revealed the isolation of the moment. Friendship had sustained him, but now even friendship faltered. He walked into this night alone, carrying the sorrow of a world and the silence of heaven. And yet, this very solitude revealed the essence of sovereignty. Fidelity without witnesses, trust without reassurance, surrender without applause. The shadow pressed hard, whispering escape, offering compromise. But Jesus chose fidelity. In that choice, sovereignty was sealed. The rebellion of Lucifer had been the exaltation of will against the Father. The fidelity of Michael was the surrender of will to the Father. In that surrender, the universe found its true king. Thus, Gethsemane stands as the axis of history, not the spectacle of crucifixion, but the hidden surrender in a garden. Here the beloved Son showed that true sovereignty is not the ability to impose, but the willingness to yield, not the strength to dominate, but the courage to trust. Here anguish met confidence, fear met fidelity, humanity met divinity. And the night, though heavy, became luminous. The olive grove was hushed, yet within the silence a storm raged. Gethsemane was not the absence of movement, but the clash of two currents, the impulse to flee and the call to remain. In Jesus' heart, humanity and divinity wrestled in anguish. He could have left, slipped away under cover of night, walked back to Galilee, vanished into obscurity. He could have preserved his life, avoided betrayal, silenced the gathering shadow. But to leave would mean to abandon his mission, to forsake the revelation of the Father's love. Every soul knows this tension. In moments of trial, the path of escape glimmers with promise, safety, ease, relief. Yet the deeper call whispers, remain, endure, trust. The struggle in Gethsemane mirrors the inner struggle of every human heart when confronted with suffering. To flee is natural, to remain requires grace. Jesus, fully human, felt that pull with unflinching honesty. His prayer, "If it be possible, let this cup pass," is the most human cry ever uttered by the divine, is the cry of all who have felt burdened beyond bearing, all who have begged for another way. But the greatness of Gethsemane lies not in the cry, but in the answer he gave to himself. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. In these words the storm quieted, the two currents merged. His human desire for escape was surrendered into divine trust. This is not defeat, but transfiguration. It is the shift from self-preservation to self-giving, from fear to fidelity, from anguish to confidence. Sovereignty is revealed not by avoidance of suffering, but by faithful embrace of truth, whatever it may cost. The mystics call this surrender the threshold of transformation. In alchemical language, it is mortificatio, the breaking of the old vessel, so the gold of new being may emerge. In Christian mysticism, it is the dark night of the soul, where the self, stripped of all consolation, finally yields to God without conditions. In Zen, it is the emptying of the self, the letting go of clinging, until one sits in the vast silence that holds all. Gethsemane is all of these, the garden of breaking, of night, of emptiness. But it is also the garden of trust, where breaking becomes opening, night becomes dawn, emptiness becomes fullness. The apostle's slumber only deepened his solitude. "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" he asked, and they had no answer. Their weakness exposed the loneliness of the path. Sovereignty cannot depend on human support. It must root itself in the Father alone. And yet, his rebuke was gentle, tinged not with anger, but with sorrow. He knew the fragility of human resolve, the frailty of flesh. His friends slept while he wrestled, and still he loved them. Even in his anguish, compassion did not falter. The Urantia papers describe this hour as the decisive act of his bestowal. Having surrendered his will, he stood already victorious, even before arrest or crucifixion. The shadow might bind his hands, mock his body, pierce his flesh, but sovereignty was untouchable, for it had been sealed in trust. What the rebellion lost in pride, he restored in surrender. What exile broke, he healed in fidelity. This is why Gethsemane is not only his story, but ours. Each soul faces its garden, its night of decision. Each must drink a cup it does not wish to drink, walk through anguish it would rather avoid. And each is invited into the same surrender, not as resignation, but as confidence. To whisper, "Not my will, but yours," is to step into the current of eternal trust, to discover that fidelity is freedom, that surrender is sovereignty. In this way, Gethsemane is more than history. It is the map of the spiritual path. Every mystic has walked it. Every seeker has tasted it. Every heart yearning for truth will enter its silence. It is the place where the self breaks, and in breaking becomes whole. The place where the shadow presses, and in pressing reveals the light hidden within. Thus, under the olive trees, sovereignty was redefined for the universe. Not the sovereignty of control, but of surrender. Not the crown of conquest, but the chalice of trust. And in that surrender, the shadow lost its power before the cross was ever raised. When the struggle subsided, a deep stillness fell upon the garden. The anguish did not vanish, but it was transfigured. What moments before had been unbearable now became embraced. The storm of resistance gave way to a sea of quiet confidence. Jesus rose from the ground not as one defeated by sorrow, but as one strengthened through surrender. He had not escaped his fate, yet by accepting it he had already overcome it. This is the paradox of Gethsemane. What looked like weakness was strength. What felt like breaking was healing. What seemed like loss was victory. Sovereignty was not lost, but revealed. Revealed in trust deeper than fear, in fidelity stronger than death. Before soldiers ever arrived, before Judas ever kissed him, before nails pierced his flesh, the victory was already sealed. The rebellion that once exalted pride above God was undone by one man's yielding. One will surrendered, one life freely given. The Urantia papers emphasize this truth. It was here, in the garden, that the bestowal mission reached its decisive climax. The cross would manifest it in history, but the garden had already accomplished it in eternity. The Son of Man became, in full clarity, the Son of God who trusted without reserve. The fate awaiting him was dreadful, but dread no longer ruled him. He walked into it freely, and freedom is sovereignty. This interior victory radiated outward. His disciples, though still fearful, would later remember his composure, his serenity in the face of betrayal. Even angels who watched from unseen realms stood in awe, not because he summoned legions to his defense, but because he chose not to. The courage of surrender shone brighter than any sort of flame. The sovereign of Nebadon revealed to his universe that divine authority is not proven by domination, but by fidelity unto the end. This is why mystics speak of the dark night as womb of dawn. John of the Cross insisted that the night is not punishment but preparation, the space where trust matures into union. Jesus lived this truth in Gethsemane. The darkness was thick, the silence overwhelming. Yet in yielding to it, he discovered the Father's presence hidden even in absence. Night did not crush him. It birthed within him a deeper light, one that no enemy could extinguish. In Zen language, the garden became a place of emptiness filled with infinite fullness. The self, stripped of all defense, all clinging, dissolved into the vastness of being. Not my will was the letting go. Yours be done was the flowering of boundless trust. In that silence, he became the very embodiment of the void that is not nothingness, but the space where all is held. From this stillness, he could walk into trial and crucifixion not as victim, but as vessel of fidelity. Even betrayal could not shake this calm. Judas appeared with torches and soldiers, his kiss burning with treachery. Yet Jesus did not recoil. "Friend," he said, addressing even the betrayer with tenderness. This single word revealed the transformation wrought in Gethsemane. Betrayal had no power to harden his heart. Having surrendered to the Father, he was free to embrace even his enemy with love. The sovereignty of surrender disarmed the poison of hatred. Thus the garden became not a place of defeat, but of triumph. Its olive branches, silent witnesses, would forever testify that sovereignty is not seized by force, but received in surrender. And in that surrender lies the seed of resurrection. For death can bind only what clings to self. It cannot bind what is yielded fully to God. Gethsemane was the gateway not only to the cross, but to the empty tomb, not only to anguish, but to glory. This is the invitation hidden in the story. Every soul has its Gethsemane, its night of anguish, its cup it does not wish to drink. Yet the path of the Son shows the way. Resist, wrestle, weep, but then trust, surrender, rise. For in surrender we discover strength. In yielding we find freedom. In dying to self, we awaken to life that cannot die. And so Jesus left the garden with steps steady and eyes clear. The shadow would close around him, but he no longer walked within its grip. Sovereignty had been surrendered, and in that surrender, eternity had already triumphed. Gethsemane was not simply a garden. It became an altar. The olive trees stood as silent pillars, their roots deep in earth, their branches stretched toward the heavens, witnessing the greatest act of sovereignty the universe has ever known, the sovereignty of surrender. Here the Son of Man laid down not his mission, but his will, not his truth, but his self-preservation. In that yielding, he revealed the paradox at the heart of eternity, that the highest power is fidelity, and the deepest freedom is trust. From the outside, nothing spectacular occurred. No thunder split the skies, no armies clashed, no fire descended. There was only prayer, anguish, silence, and resolve. Yet within that silence, galaxies held their breath. For in the garden of decision, the rebellion of ages met its answer. Lucifer's cry of independence, "I will not serve," was undone by the Son's whisper of surrender. "Not my will, but yours be done." In this reversal, the cosmos was realigned, the fracture of Urantia began to heal, and sovereignty was revealed as service perfected in love. This is why mystics across traditions return to Gethsemane as symbol and path. The mortificatio of alchemy, the breaking that precedes gold, the dark night of the soul, where the self is stripped until only God remains. The Zen void, emptiness that opens into infinite fullness. All of these converge in the garden. And in each tradition, the truth resounds. What dies in surrender is illusion, and what lives is eternal. For Urantia, this moment was not hidden in obscurity, though few understood it at the time. It was the axis on which history turned, the unseen victory that made every later resurrection possible. The cross would display suffering to human eyes, but the garden had already revealed victory to the universe. Before nails pierced, before tomb closed, sovereignty was already secured in the stillness beneath olive branches. The lesson is eternal. Every soul will walk its Gethsemane, its night of anguish, its hour of decision. Each will face the choice, to flee or to trust, to cling or to surrender. And in that moment, the garden whispers the invitation, yield. Yield and discover strength deeper than fear. Yield and discover life beyond loss. Yield and discover that surrender is not the end, but the opening of eternity. Jesus left the garden not as victim, but as victor. His hands would soon be bound, yet his freedom was untouchable. His body would soon be broken, yet his sovereignty unshaken. The shadow had pressed with all its weight, but in surrender, he carried a peace no darkness could disturb. He walked toward betrayal, trial, and cross with steps steady and eyes clear, because Gethsemane had already revealed the truth. The Father's will is love, and to align with it is eternal victory. Thus the chapter closes not in despair, but in radiance. The garden remains a place of anguish, but more deeply, it is the sanctuary of fidelity, the threshold of resurrection, the altar where sovereignty was revealed as surrender. And beyond the garden lies the cross. The shadow will gather into its most brutal form. The powers of the world will unleash their violence, and human eyes will see only death. But the truth already shines. The cross is not the end. The victory was won in the stillness of Gethsemane, and the cross will only make visible what has already been accomplished in surrender. Chapter 10, the cross was not the end. The hill rose stark against the sky, a barren summit chosen not for its beauty, but for its cruelty. Golgotha was a place of execution, a space where empire displayed its power through spectacle of death. Yet on that hill, beneath a sky darkened by sorrow, the deepest paradox of history unfolded. What Rome intended as humiliation, what priests demanded as silencing, became instead the unveiling of fidelity. The cross, symbol of defeat, became the portal of eternal victory. The Urantia papers remind us that the cross was not demanded by the Father, nor decreed as ransom. It was the inevitable consequence of a life lived in uncompromising truth. Jesus' fidelity to love, his refusal to bend to hypocrisy, his relentless compassion for the marginalized, these clashed with systems built on fear and power. The cross was the world's response to truth too radiant to ignore. And yet, in accepting it without hatred, he transfigured it. Death could not diminish him. It only revealed his unshakable sovereignty. Here silence spoke louder than words. Throughout his trial, he answered little, for truth does not need endless defense. On the cross, he uttered few phrases, but each was a universe. Forgiveness for those who struck him, comfort for the thief beside him, surrender to the Father in his final breath. No manifesto, no thunder, no armies, only fidelity, expressed in silence and love. This is the sovereignty of surrender taken to its fullest expression. Mystics have long called the cross a portal. To pass through it is to pass beyond appearances, beyond fear, into the eternal. It is not the end of life, but the unveiling of life that cannot end. The Rosicrucian tradition would later depict the cross as symbol of cosmic union. Wood rooted in earth, arms stretched to embrace the world, vertical beam piercing toward heaven, intersection becoming the axis of transformation. On Golgotha, this symbol was no longer theory but reality. The cross was the place where heaven and earth, time and eternity, suffering and glory met in a single presence. The Kabbalah speaks of Gevura, the severe strength that restrains, that accepts sacrifice to preserve greater harmony. In Jesus, Gevura was perfected. He did not retaliate, though he could have summoned legions of angels. He did not curse, though he bore injustice. He endured, not out of resignation, but out of fidelity. His strength was not the strength of force, but of restraint, the courage to remain faithful in the face of violence. This is the true power of the cross, to reveal that love is stronger than hatred, that fidelity is mightier than fear, that silence can thunder louder than cruelty. The crowd mocked, demanding spectacle. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. Yet the true miracle was not descent, but endurance. To descend would have been to align with the world's expectations of power. To remain was to reveal a higher order, a sovereignty that transcends spectacle. The cross stood as contradiction to every empire. Victory through surrender, glory through humility, eternity through death embraced. Even the universe seemed to shudder. The Urantia papers describe how angels looked on in awe, not at the brutality of humans, but at the fidelity of their sovereign. For in that moment, the cosmos witnessed the depth of divine love, a love that would rather suffer than abandon, that would rather be wounded than betray, that would rather die than deny truth. The cross became the eternal testimony that God is not distant ruler, but faithful companion, even unto suffering. For Urantia, long scarred by rebellion, the cross was not curse but cure. It revealed to mortals and celestials alike that the Father's love is unconquerable, that the sovereign of Nebadon reigns not by fear but by fidelity. Where rebellion cried, "I will not serve," the cross declared, "I will be faithful, even unto death." And in that declaration, the fracture of the universe began to heal. Thus Golgotha, place of execution, became sanctuary. The cross, meant as symbol of shame, became axis of glory. And the silence of Jesus, pierced by a few words of forgiveness and surrender, resounded louder than all armies of history. This is why the cross was not the end. It was the unveiling of eternal sovereignty, the completion of surrender begun in Gethsemane, the portal through which all creation glimpsed the indestructible fidelity of God. The wood of the cross, rough and ordinary, became the axis of the extraordinary. Its beams, lifted against the sky, traced a geometry more profound than any temple could contain. Vertical and horizontal intersected, and in that intersection heaven met earth, eternity entered time, divinity embraced humanity. What Rome saw as mere scaffolding of execution was, in truth, the cosmic symbol made flesh. Mystics through the centuries have intuited this mystery. The cross is not simply instrument of death, but portal of transformation. It is the narrow gate through which illusion is stripped, where self-preservation dies and fidelity is revealed as indestructible. The silence of Jesus upon it was not absence, but presence, the stillness of eternity breaking into history. His surrender was not collapse, but transfiguration. The cross was the veil torn, not in temple stone alone, but in the consciousness of creation. Rosicrucian wisdom later depicted the cross as the rose blooming in wood, life flowering in death, beauty hidden in suffering, eternity concealed in time. On Golgotha, this symbol took on flesh. The rose of divine love opened in blood and silence, declaring to the universe that nothing, not even cruelty, can wither the fragrance of fidelity. The cross thus stands as paradox: death that births life, shame that reveals glory, defeat that becomes victory. In the language of the Kabbalah, the cross resonates with Gevura. This Sapphira, the sphere of strength and severity, embodies sacrifice for the sake of harmony, restraint for the sake of truth. Jesus upon the cross is the perfect image of Gevura, power held in silence, might expressed in endurance, justice tempered by mercy. He could have shattered the scene with one word, but restraint was his glory. He chose not to descend, not to retaliate, but to remain faithful. His silence thundered as judgment on distortion and as salvation for the humble. And yet, the cross is more than symbol, it is encounter. To gaze upon, it is to see our own shadows mirrored, our fear, our cruelty, our complicity in systems of distortion, but is also to see those shadows met with forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. These words, uttered in agony, reveal the essence of the kingdom. Love offered even to those who wound, grace extended even to those who reject it. The cross unmasks our darkness and, in the same breath, heals it. The Urantia papers insist that the Father did not demand this death as payment. Rather, it was the inevitable outcome of light confronting shadow, of love colliding with systems of control. The cross was not sacrifice demanded by God, but fidelity offered by the Son. And in this fidelity, the revelation was complete. God suffers with us. God endures with us. God does not abandon even in our worst hour. The cross is eternal companionship, sealed in silence and blood. In cosmic perspective, the cross revealed to all Nebadon the nature of true sovereignty. Armies of angels witnessed not thunder or flame, but humility and endurance. Celestial rulers saw that the universe is governed not by coercion, but by love that refuses to yield. The rebellion of Lucifer had exalted autonomy, but the cross unveiled the freedom found in surrender. It was the final refutation of pride, the definitive answer to distortion. The sovereign reigns by compassion, not compulsion. The cross, then, is not merely a moment in history, but an eternal pattern. Every soul will face its own cross. the place where truth collides with fear, where fidelity demands surrender, where silence must speak louder than words. To embrace, it is to enter the same portal, to die to illusion, to rise into fidelity, to live in the freedom of surrender. This is why mystics across traditions have found in the cross their path, their symbol, their song. It is the eternal invitation to let go of self-preservation and to trust that life, hidden in surrender, is indestructible. Thus, Golgotha becomes more than a hill. It is the cosmic intersection of love and suffering, of earth and heaven, of time and eternity. And at its center stands not defeat, but revelation. The fidelity of the Son, radiant in silence, stronger than death. The cross was not the end because it never belonged to death. It belonged to love, and love cannot die. On Golgotha, words dwindled and silence expanded. The clamor of soldiers, the jeers of the crowd, the mocking of priests, all faded against the stillness of the one who refused to retaliate. His silence was not emptiness, but fullness, not resignation, but revelation. It became a new language, one that transcended words, one that could be read by mortals and celestials alike. For mortals, the cross was the mirror of their own violence. They saw what power does when confronted with truth. It crucifies. Yet in that act, they also saw what love does when confronted with violence. It forgives. Every hammer strike, every taunt, every wound was met not with hatred, but with surrender. In this way, the cross spoke a grammar of grace. It taught that even in humanity's darkest act, divinity does not abandon, but embraces. For the celestials, the cross was the final unveiling of Michael's sovereignty. Angels and archangels had long awaited the completion of his bestowal mission, and here it was revealed in its starkest form. The sovereign of Nebadon did not need thrones or armies to assert authority. He needed only fidelity. His silence thundered louder than any proclamation. The universe is ruled not by coercion, but by love, not by fear, but by trust, not by pride, but by surrender. The Rosicrucian vision of the rose blooming inward finds its fulfillment here. Outwardly, there was only the rough timber of execution, stained with blood and shadowed by death. Yet inwardly, a rose bloomed, the fragrance of love spreading through the cosmos, invisible to eyes, yet unmistakable to hearts. The cross was both wound and flower, pain and beauty, death and life entwined. The Kabbalistic Gevura resounded as well. The severity of sacrifice, the restraint of power, the choice to endure rather than to destroy. This was strength in its truest form. To hold back what one could unleash, to suffer what one could end, to remain faithful when escape was possible. This is divine might. The cross revealed Gevura perfected, strength expressed as fidelity, restraint revealed as sovereignty. But perhaps most striking was the universality of its message. The crowd gathered at Golgotha did not grasp its depth, yet the echo resounded beyond time and culture. Mystics, seekers, poets, and philosophers across centuries would find in the cross a language that spoke to the deepest human condition. It spoke to the broken, saying, "You are not abandoned." It spoke to the guilty, saying, "Forgiveness is stronger than failure." It spoke to the fearful, saying, "Courage is fidelity, not force." It spoke to the faithful, saying, "Love cannot die." The Urantia papers emphasize that redemption did not come through the shedding of blood as payment, but through the fidelity of love revealed. The cross was the culmination of a life lived without compromise, a mission carried without retreat, a friendship offered without withdrawal. It was the visible sign of the invisible truth that God's love abides, even when rejected, even when crucified. This is why the cross is not the end. Silence itself testified to continuity. The surrender of breath was not finality, but passage. In his final words, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," we hear not despair but trust. This trust, sealed in silence, was the seed of resurrection. For resurrection is not reversal of death, but the unveiling of life that was never lost. The cross pointed beyond itself, beyond shadow, beyond tomb. It was the gateway, the threshold, the hinge between anguish and glory. Thus, the silence of Golgotha became universal speech. It reached into heaven and earth, into time and eternity, into mortals and angels alike. It revealed that love's language does not need noise. Its fidelity speaks in silence stronger than thunder. The cross was not defeat, not payment, not end. It was the revelation that even in the face of humanity's worst, divinity remains faithful, and such fidelity cannot end in death. The silence of the cross was already the whisper of dawn, the rose that bloomed and would bloom again in light. The sovereign who surrendered would rise not as victim, but as victor. The shadow had spent its force, but the silence of fidelity was stronger. Resurrection was inevitable, for life hidden in surrender is indestructible. The shadow of Golgotha stretched long across the earth, but it did not prevail. The cross, stark and solitary against the darkened sky, remains more than a memory. It is an eternal witness. Not to cruelty, though cruelty nailed him there. Not to defeat, though the world declared it so. It is the witness to fidelity, to a love that refused compromise, to a sovereignty that chose surrender. The Urantia papers tell us the cross was never the demand of a wrathful God, but the consequence of a life lived in perfect truth. That truth could not bend, could not hide, could not be silenced. It stood radiant in every act of compassion, every word of courage, every challenge to hypocrisy. And so the powers of the age sought to extinguish it with wood and iron. Yet what they sought to end, they only unveiled. The cross revealed the heart of God as closer than breath, as faithful even when despised. Mystics across ages have seen the cross as portal, the axis where all opposites converge. Earth and heaven, death and life, shame and glory, time and eternity, all intersect in its beams. To gaze upon it is to gaze upon mystery, that what wounds can also heal, that what ends can also begin, that what breaks can also open. The Rosicrucian rose blooming from a wood is no legend but symbol fulfilled, beauty concealed in suffering, life hidden within death, glory veiled beneath silence. And the silence endures. For the cross does not shout, it whispers. It does not force belief, it invites trust. Its power lies not in spectacle, but in presence. To stand before it is to feel the weight of our own shadows, and yet, more deeply, to feel them lifted by forgiveness. It is the eternal invitation, not to worship suffering, but to see in suffering the fidelity of love. The Kabbalah's Gevura illuminates the mystery still further. Strength is not in breaking others, but in restraining oneself. Power is not in retaliation, but in endurance. On the cross, strength revealed itself as patience, power as silence, might as love. This is why the cross remains an eternal axis. It unmasks our illusions of force and shows us the higher order, where fidelity outshines dominion. But the cross does not stand alone. It is threshold, not destination. The silence it speaks is not final word, but waiting word, a breath held before dawn. The cross is the door, but resurrection is the room beyond. Fidelity cannot end in silence. It must flower into song. Love cannot stop at surrender. It must rise into life. What the cross reveals, the resurrection proclaims, that what is surrendered in trust is never lost, but transfigured. Thus, the cross becomes for the universe a perpetual sign, not of darkness, but of dawn. It tells every mortal and celestial alike, fidelity is stronger than fear, surrender is greater than pride, love cannot be broken. It invites each soul into its mystery, to yield what cannot be kept and to receive what cannot be lost. And so, even as the hill of execution faded into night, a deeper light was already stirring. The rose hidden in the wood was preparing to bloom in radiance. The silence that seemed so final was already trembling with the first notes of a new song. The cross was not the end. It was the hinge on which eternity turned. Beyond it waited the empty tomb, the radiant dawn, the revelation of life that cannot die. Chapter 11. The resurrection of what cannot die. The night was long, but dawn did not delay. As the first light touched the horizon, the stone that sealed the tomb was no longer barrier, but witness. The silence of Golgotha gave way to a silence of another kind, the silence of mystery, of victory beyond comprehension. Resurrection was not spectacle for crowds. It was the whisper of eternity breaking into time. The tomb could not contain him, for he was never truly contained by death. The Urantia papers tell us clearly, the resurrection was not a resuscitation of mortal flesh, but the unveiling of a reality deeper than matter. Jesus rose not merely to walk again in Galilee, but to reveal the indestructibility of spirit, the continuity of life that does not end when breath ceases. His form was transfigured, subtle, luminous, a body of glory that could appear and vanish, recognized and yet beyond recognition. This was not return to the old, but manifestation of the eternal. Here lies the heart of resurrection, not reversal, but revelation. Death did not yield because it was conquered by force. Death yielded because it had no claim on what is eternal. Spirit cannot be bound by decay, cannot be silenced by tomb, cannot be ended by violence. What Jesus unveiled on that morning was not his private triumph, but the truth that underlies all existence. Life is indestructible when rooted in God. Ancient myths whispered fragments of this truth. The Egyptians told of Osiris, slain and dismembered, yet reborn as Lord of the underworld. His resurrection was symbol of renewal, of life continuing beyond the grave. In the story of Osiris, humanity sensed what dawn would reveal in Jesus, that death is passage, not end. Yet Osiris remained bound to the cycles of nature, his resurrection shadowed by decay. Jesus' resurrection broke the cycle. It was not bound to time, but to eternity, not dependent on myth, but grounded in reality of spirit. The Vedantic seers declared that Atman, the true self, is eternal, untouched by birth and death. Weapons cannot cut it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot wet it, wind cannot dry it. In the resurrection, this truth became visible. The self aligned with God, the soul fused with eternity, cannot perish. Jesus embodied the Vedantic intuition in flesh transfigured. His resurrection was Atman unveiled, the assurance that within each soul lies the same indestructible essence, waiting to be awakened. Christian mysticism would later call it the body of light, the form not of flesh, but of glory, radiant, unbound by the laws of matter. This is what the disciples glimpsed when he appeared among them. Familiar yet transformed, intimate yet transcendent. They touched and doubted, believed and trembled, for they saw in him not a return to what was, but a foretaste of what shall be. The resurrection body was the bridge between time and eternity, the promise of what humanity itself is destined to become. The stone rolled away is thus not merely removal of obstacle, but revelation of truth. You cannot imprison life that flows from God. You cannot silence the word that was in the beginning. You cannot bury the light that is the life of all men. The tomb was empty not because life had returned, but because life had never truly left. And yet, the beauty of the resurrection lies not in abstraction, but in intimacy. It was first revealed not to rulers or crowds, but to women at the dawn, hearts broken by grief, yet faithful in love. They came expecting death, and they found eternity. Their tears turned to awe, their sorrow to wonder, their silence to proclamation. This choice of witnesses is itself revelation. Eternity is entrusted first to love, not to power, first to the faithful heart, not to the calculating mind. Thus, resurrection is not only cosmic event, but personal invitation. It whispers to every soul, you're not bound by shadow. You carry within you a life that cannot die. The death you fear is but a passage. The loss you dread is but a veil. Resurrection is the unveiling of what has always been true, that in God, life is endless, and in love, nothing is ever lost. The dawn of that morning still shines. The stone still testifies. The empty tomb still speaks its paradox. What was crucified lives, what was buried rises, what was silent sings. The resurrection was not the reversal of tragedy, but the revelation of truth, that nothing eternal can be destroyed. The dawn of resurrection was more than the renewal of one life. It was the realignment of a universe. The cross had unmasked the cruelty of power and the fidelity of love, but the resurrection proclaimed the final word. Love is not only faithful, it is victorious. What the Garden of Gethsemane resolved in surrender, the empty tomb revealed in triumph. The Urantia papers describe the resurrection as the event that shook celestial realms as much as it consoled mortal hearts. For millennia, the rebellion of Lucifer had cast shadows of doubt across the universes, whispering that freedom lay in pride and that sovereignty was illusion. Yet here, in the silence of a garden tomb, the sovereign of Nebadon answered without sword, without decree, without spectacle. He rose, and in rising, he declared to angels and mortals alike, fidelity is indestructible, and life is stronger than death. This was not victory for himself alone. It was victory for every being who ever feared the silence of death, who ever trembled before the unknown. Resurrection unveiled the continuity of existence, that the soul's journey does not end in darkness, but flows into larger light. The illusion of finality was shattered. Death remained as passage, but no longer as prison. Its sting was broken, not by denial of suffering, but by transfiguration through it. Ancient mythologies had long intuited echoes of this truth. Osiris, dismembered and restored, offered Egyptians a symbol of continuity beyond the grave. Yet his resurrection belonged to cycles of decay and renewal, bound to nature's seasons. Jesus' resurrection transcended the cycle. It was not return to an endless loop, but entrance into eternity, life unbound by corruption. The myth became history, and history became revelation. Vedanic philosophy, too, spoke of the deathless self. Atman is Brahman, they proclaimed. The innermost self is one with the eternal. Yet for many, this remained abstract, a truth glimpsed in meditation or philosophy. In Jesus, abstraction became encounter. The disciples touched eternity not in distant speculation, but in a familiar voice calling their names, in a presence breaking bread at their table, in a figure radiant yet intimate. The eternal was no longer only idea, it was embodied reality. The resurrection was also cosmic correction. Where rebellion had exalted autonomy, resurrection revealed communion. Where fear had enthroned death, resurrection unveiled eternity. Where humanity saw only finality, resurrection offered hope. And this hope was not fragile optimism, but living presence. The Spirit of truth poured out so that all might carry within themselves the same assurance that lifted the stone that morning. But the victory was not only cosmic, it was also profoundly human. To his followers, scattered and broken, the resurrection was the reweaving of their shattered faith. They had fled in fear, denied in shame, wept in despair. Yet the risen presence gathered them again, not with rebuke, but with peace. "Peace be with you," he said, and in those words the weight of failure dissolved. Resurrection was not only triumph over death, but reconciliation with the living. In this way, the resurrection speaks to every soul. It tells us that our failures are not final, that our endings are not ultimate, that our fears are not eternal. It whispers that even when all seems lost, love waits beyond the stone. For what cannot die is not only spirit, but the bond of love that flows from the Father. Thus the resurrection stands as eternal signpost. For mortals, it proclaims the journey beyond the grave. For angels, it affirms the nature of sovereignty as fidelity. For the universe, it completes the answer to rebellion. Pride collapses, but love endures. Autonomy fractures, but communion prevails. Death mocks, but life has the last word. The empty tomb, then, is not a relic of history, but a living presence. Every dawn repeats its lesson. Light rises, shadows recede, eternity shines. Resurrection is not past event, but ongoing truth. The pulse of eternity in every heartbeat, the promise of life in every death, the assurance that nothing rooted in love is ever lost. The disciples who first beheld the risen one struggled to name what they saw. Was it the same Jesus who had walked with them by Galilee's waters? Or was it someone more? He stood among them, familiar in voice and gesture, yet radiant with an otherness that transcended recognition. They touched him, yet he moved like light. They ate with him, yet he vanished from their sight. What they encountered was not resuscitated flesh, but the mystery of the body of light. The Urantia papers describe the resurrection body as merantial, a form that bridges the material and the spiritual, the temporal and the eternal. It is a body freed from decay, luminous and subtle, capable of presence beyond limitation. This was the form of the risen Jesus, the revelation not of life returning, but of life transfigured. He embodied the future of humanity, the destiny awaiting every soul that fuses with the divine. Mystics have long spoken of such a body. Christian esoteric tradition names it the corpus gloriae, the body of glory. It is the garment woven not by flesh, but by fidelity, not by blood, but by spirit. In resurrection, Jesus wore this garment openly. His light was the light of truth, his form the expression of eternity. To gaze upon him was to see what humanity itself is called to become. Vessels of light, transparent to God, radiant with love. In Egyptian imagination, Osiris was raised as Lord of the Dead, ruling in shadow but affirming continuity. Yet Jesus was not Lord of the dead, but the living. His resurrection did not merely affirm existence beyond the grave. It unveiled transformation beyond decay. Where Osiris remained tied to the cycles of the Nile, Jesus transcended cycles altogether. His body of light was not bound to earth's rhythms, but revealed the eternal horizon of spirit. Vedantic insight, too, resonates here. The Atman, the self, is untouched by birth and death, veiled by illusion, yet radiant with eternity. In resurrection, the veil was lifted. The risen one revealed Atman in its fullness. The eternal self fused with divine source, luminous and indestructible. What philosophy glimpsed, resurrection embodied. It was the visible testimony that union with God is not abstraction, but destiny. This mystery is not his alone. The resurrection body is the promise hidden in every soul. Fidelity to truth, surrender to love, trust in the Father. All these shape the vessel of light within us. Resurrection was the unveiling not only of his victory, but of our future. Every act of surrender prepares the garment. Every choice of love weaves its threads. Every fidelity to truth shapes its form. We too are destined for light. This is why the resurrection is transformative for the present, not only for the future. To believe it is not merely to hope for life after death, but to live differently now. It calls us to embody the light even in the shadow, to reveal eternity even in time. The risen one walks through locked doors, appears at tables, speaks peace into fear. So, too, the resurrection calls us to move beyond walls of fear, to bring peace where despair reigns, to embody love in places of death. The disciples were transfigured by this encounter. Their fear dissolved, their shame lifted, their despair turned to joy. They had fled the cross, but now they proclaimed the resurrection with courage that no threat could silence. For they knew that what they had seen was not illusion, but truth. Death was no longer master. Life had revealed itself indestructible. The body of light thus shines as symbol and destiny. It reminds us that our journey does not end in dissolution, but in transformation. Our mortal forms wither, but fidelity weaves another garment. Our breath ceases, but spirit awakens to larger life. Our tombs close, but eternity opens. The resurrection body is the promise that nothing given in love is ever lost, that what surrenders in trust is transfigured in glory. Thus the risen one stands as both revelation and invitation. Revelation of eternity unveiled in time. Invitation to walk the path that leads from shadow to light. His resurrection is not escape from humanity, but fulfillment of it. Not denial of suffering, but transfiguration through it. The body of light is his gift and our destiny. The assurance that what cannot die is not distant, but already within us, waiting to be revealed. The dawn of resurrection has never faded. It was not bound to one morning in Jerusalem, nor to one empty tomb. It is an eternal reality, a light woven into the fabric of creation, a truth that pulses through every soul. What is born of God cannot die. Jesus' rising was not singular anomaly, but revelation of destiny, unveiling for all beings the indestructible essence of life rooted in the Father. The Urantia papers affirm this clearly. The resurrection was the seal of Michael's sovereignty, the cosmic testimony that love reigns supreme. Yet it was also more intimate, the assurance that each human heart, however fragile, is destined for light. The risen one did not rise for himself alone. He rose as first fruit of a harvest uncountable, the promise that we too are woven into eternity. Mystics have long understood resurrection as both cosmic and personal. It is cosmic in that it realigned the universe, dissolving the shadow of rebellion with fidelity revealed as eternal. It is personal in that it whispers to each of us, your fears are not final, your failures are not absolute, your mortality is not your end. The empty tomb is a mirror, inviting us to see our own destiny reflected in its silence. The image of the body of light becomes therefore a call, not only a promise. To live now in faith is to begin weaving that garment, to embody already the radiance we are meant to reveal. Fidelity, surrender, compassion, these are the threads of eternity. Each act of love is a thread of light. Each act of trust a strand of glory. Each surrender to truth a stitch in the eternal garment. Resurrection is not only awaited, it is already being woven in us. The ancients intuited this through symbols: Osiris rising, Atman untouched, roses blooming from crosses of wood. But in Jesus, symbol became flesh, and flesh became spirit unveiled. No longer myth or metaphor, resurrection became history and destiny, the axis where humanity glimpsed eternity. The tomb's emptiness is not absence, but presence. Presence of the eternal woven into the temporal. Presence of the indestructible revealed in the fragile. Presence of life unveiled in death's shadow. And yet resurrection does not leave us in passive awe. It calls us into active fidelity. It is not only a victory to contemplate, but a path to walk. The risen one spoke peace into fear, forgiveness into guilt, mission into despair. He breathed spirit upon his friends, sending them into the world as bearers of the same light. Resurrection is not only what happened to him, it is what happens through us when we live as vessels of his presence. Thus, the resurrection becomes the hinge between past and future, the portal through which the age to come dawns. From the empty tomb flows the spirit of truth, the living continuity of Jesus' presence in every heart. Resurrection is not the end of his story, but the widening of it, the expansion of his life into all lives, his fidelity into all hearts, his light into every corner of creation. The cross had been the silence of surrender. The tomb was the silence of victory. And from that silence, eternity now speaks, "Be not afraid." The resurrection is the cosmic assurance that nothing faithful is ever lost, nothing given in love is ever wasted, nothing surrendered to God is ever forgotten. It is the eternal summons to trust, to live as children of light, to embody already what cannot die. The chapter closes then, not in conclusion, but in invitation. For beyond resurrection lies further gift, the Spirit of truth poured out not only to comfort, but to transform, not only to console, but to commission. The risen one rises not to withdraw, but to remain, not to vanish, but to multiply his presence in every soul that yields to light. The tomb is empty, but the world is filled. And so the path unfolds, from cross to resurrection, from resurrection to spirit, from spirit to the age to come. The story is not ending, it is only beginning. Chapter 12, the Spirit of Truth and the Age to Come. The wind came first, rushing through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, carrying with it not dust or debris, but a presence. It filled the house where the disciples gathered, still uncertain, still trembling between fear and faith. Tongues of fire appeared, not consuming wood or flesh, but igniting the unseen chambers of the heart. What had been silence at the tomb now became voice. What had been hidden in resurrection now became shared in spirit. Pentecost was not an isolated miracle, but the unveiling of a new era, the age of the Spirit of truth. The Urantia papers describe this moment as the fulfillment of Jesus' promise. I will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you. The Spirit of truth was not a doctrine handed down, nor a mere memory preserved. It was His living presence multiplied in every soul. What was once confined to Galilee's roads and Jerusalem's hillsides now flowed freely through the inner world of every believer. Jesus had walked beside them. Now He would dwell within them. The language of Pentecost was fire, not fire that destroys, but fire that enlightens, warms, and transforms. Each disciple felt it not only above their heads, but within their hearts. It was the alchemical flame, the invisible fire that transmutes fear into courage, despair into hope, isolation into communion. The Spirit of truth did not descend to establish institutions or laws, but to ignite hearts with the living flame of presence. Mystics have always known this fire. Alchemists spoke of the secret flame, hidden in matter, yet capable of transfiguring all things. Gnostics called it pneuma, the breath of divinity that awakens the sleeping spark within. In the rushing wind and flaming tongues of Pentecost, these symbols came alive. The disciples became vessels of a fire that could not be extinguished, carriers of a presence that could not be contained. The significance of Pentecost was not in spectacle alone, but in transformation. Cowards became heralds. Doubters became witnesses. The scattered became a community bound by spirit. Their words reached across barriers of language, culture, and fear, each heard in their own tongue. For the Spirit of truth speaks, not to the ear, but to the soul. The fire did not create uniformity, but harmony, not control, but communion. It was the beginning of a kingdom not of this world, but in this world, a kingdom of awakened hearts. The Spirit of truth is not external command, but inner compass. It does not dictate with coercion, but whispers with clarity. It does not impose law, but awakens love. Its fire burns away illusion, revealing fidelity, illuminating paths of courage. It is the presence of Jesus, not as memory frozen in time, but as living guide in every moment. Wherever a soul listens to the inner voice, wherever one chooses truth over fear, love over hatred, fidelity over compromise, there the Spirit burns. And this fire is not limited to apostles or saints. It is poured upon all flesh, offered without measure to every heart that hungers for truth. The Spirit of truth does not choose by rank or ritual. It flows freely, invisibly, intimately. It is the democracy of spirit, the universality of presence. Just as resurrection revealed that life cannot die, Pentecost revealed that love cannot be contained. Thus, Pentecost was not end, but beginning. It was the dawn of the age in which we live still, the age of spirit, where Jesus walks no longer in one body but in countless hearts. The Spirit of truth is the continuity of His mission, the assurance that no shadow, no empire, no institution can silence His voice. For His voice is now within, a flame no darkness can extinguish. The disciples left that house of flame not with violence, but with vision. They carried no weapons, only words, no armies, only presence. Yet the fire spread, not consuming but illuminating, not destroying but transforming. The Spirit of truth had come, and the age of the inner fire had begun. The rushing wind of Pentecost was not confined to a single day. It was the opening of a current that has never ceased to flow, the unveiling of a presence that abides across centuries. The Spirit of Truth was not bound to the walls of that upper room. It moved outward through streets, across nations, into every age. What was given once continues to be given always. The Spirit is not history, but continuity, eternal presence breathing within time. The Urantia papers insist that this Spirit is the living presence of Jesus himself, multiplied in every soul. No longer a teacher in Galilee or a figure in Jerusalem. He became companion of every seeker, guide of every conscience, light within every heart. The Spirit of Truth does not merely recall his words, it reenacts his presence. Wherever truth is sought sincerely, wherever love is chosen freely, wherever fidelity resists fear, there he is. This is why Pentecost is more than miracle. It is paradigm. The Spirit did not come as law, but as breath. Pneuma in Greek means both spirit and wind, both breath and life. It cannot be grasped, contained, or controlled. It moves as it wills, breaking barriers, transcending systems, whispering into silence. The Spirit of Truth does not coerce belief. It invites trust. It does not impose structure. It awakens freedom. It is Jesus not as distant memory, but as immediate presence, living now. Mystics across traditions have touched this continuity. They describe the same fire in different languages, the alchemist's invisible flame, the Sufi's burning love, the Taoist flow of the way, the Christian mystic's interior light. All are variations of the same reality, the Spirit that abides, guiding souls into truth, not by command, but by communion. For truth is not forced upon us. It unfolds in us as we yield to the flame already burning within. The Spirit of Truth is also profoundly personal. It does not speak in thunder from mountains, but in whispers within the heart. It illumines conscience, deepens compassion, strengthens courage. It does not dictate every choice, but orients the soul toward what is real and lasting. It is not a voice of fear, but of freedom, not burden, but breath. It leads us not into servitude, but into sonship, not into ritual alone, but into living relationship with the Father. And yet, its presence is also universal. The Spirit was poured upon all flesh, transcending boundaries of nation, creed, or class. It is not reserved for the pure or the powerful, but given to all who hunger for truth. The fisherman and the philosopher, the child and the sage, the humble and the learned, all may carry this fire. It does not discriminate, for it is the love of Jesus diffused into humanity, impartial as sunlight, intimate as breath. History bears witness to this continuity. Whenever compassion has broken chains of oppression, whenever courage has spoken truth to power, whenever forgiveness has healed division, the Spirit of Truth has moved. It may not always be named, but it is always present. Its fire ignites reformers, mystics, saints, and even quiet souls whose fidelity remains unseen. The Spirit does not require visibility to be real. It burns invisibly, faithfully, in every act of love. The Urantia papers remind us that this Spirit is the antidote to fear. It does not shield us from trial, but gives strength within trial. It does not promise escape, but grants presence. It is the invisible companion who whispers in darkness, "You are not alone." It is the fire that warms even in exile, the breath that sustains even in silence, the guide that leads even when paths are unclear. Thus, the Spirit of Truth is not past but present, not memory but immediacy. It flows through centuries as rushing wind, abides in hearts as gentle flame, speaks in silence as inner voice. It is the fidelity of Jesus multiplied, the continuity of his presence universalized. Pentecost was dawn, but the day has never ended. To live in this presence is to recognize that we are never abandoned. The Spirit of truth breathes still, urging us toward courage, fidelity, and love. Its fire refines without consuming. Its wind carries without scattering. Its voice convicts without condemning. It is the continuity of Jesus in us, the living assurance that his promise endures. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The Spirit of truth does not descend as spectacle, but as transformation. Its fire is not the blaze of destruction, but the flame that refines without consuming. It enters quietly, invisibly, yet once kindled it reshapes everything it touches. Like the hidden work of alchemy, it turns the base into gold. Not metals and furnaces, but hearts in the furnace of fidelity. Its operation is silent but decisive, for it transmutes fear into courage, despair into hope, self into gift. The alchemist spoke of a secret fire, invisible yet real, working in the depths to purify and transfigure. They searched for the stone of philosophers, the agent of transformation, unaware that the Spirit itself was this stone, this flame, this mystery alive. The Spirit of truth is the divine alchemy. It enters the crucible of human hearts and refashions them into vessels of light. The dross of selfishness burns away, the rigidity of pride melts, and the hidden gold of fidelity emerges. The Urantia papers describe the Spirit as guide, comforter, and presence, not forcing truth upon us, but awakening it within us. This is alchemy of the soul. Truth is not imposed externally, but ignited internally, unfolding as recognition rather than command. The Spirit of truth does not hand us doctrines to memorize, but kindles vision to perceive. It does not legislate, but illuminates, not compels, but inspires. This is why it is fire. It spreads, it warms, it clarifies, it transforms. Pentecost was but the first spark. The fire continues wherever hearts yield to its touch. The timid become bold, not by external command, but by inward flame. The weary find strength, not from their own reserves, but from the presence within. The divided become united, not by compulsion, but by communion. The Spirit works like leaven in dough, like light through glass, like fire through cold stone. It permeates silently until everything is changed. This is why mystics have often described spiritual awakening in images of fire. The Sufi speaks of burning love, the Christian mystic of inner flame, the Vedantin of radiant Atman. In each tradition, the testimony is the same. True transformation is not intellectual ascent alone, but ignition of being. The Spirit of truth is the flame that accomplishes this. It is the invisible fire of Pentecost, burning still, transfiguring without consuming. And this fire is communal as much as personal. It does not isolate but gathers, forging a new humanity. At Pentecost, languages were not erased but embraced. Diversity was not flattened but harmonized. The Spirit of truth does not erase differences but weaves them into symphony. This too is alchemy, the transformation of division into communion, of estrangement into belonging, of separation into unity without uniformity. It is the gold of fraternity refined from the ore of isolation. The presence of the Spirit is also a summons to continual transformation. It does not permit complacency. Fire cannot leave stone untouched. It convicts not to condemn, but to liberate, not to destroy, but to refine. Every illusion it exposes is opportunity for growth. Every shadow it burns away is invitation to light. To walk with the Spirit is to live in the furnace of love, where nothing false can endure, but everything true is preserved. Thus, the Spirit of truth is not only comforter, but catalyst. It comforts by assuring us we are never alone, but it catalyzes by propelling us into growth. It whispers peace into our fear, yet it also burns away the fear itself. It consoles in sorrow, yet it also transforms sorrow into compassion. It abides with us, yet it also pushes us beyond ourselves into service, communion, and fidelity. This is the age inaugurated by Pentecost, the age of fire invisible yet irresistible. It is the age of transformation, where humanity is not merely preserved but transfigured. The Spirit of truth is the divine alchemist, working within individuals and communities, refining history itself. It moves quietly, yet it shapes civilizations. It burns invisibly, yet it ignites epics. Its work is not yet complete, for the age continues. Each soul that yields becomes flame, each community that listens becomes light, each moment that surrenders becomes eternity. The alchemy of the Spirit thus continues, calling us not only to believe, but to become fire, to become light, to become vessels of truth. For this is the destiny of all who open to its presence, to be transfigured into what cannot die, to be woven into the age of Spirit, to burn forever with the invisible flame of love. The rushing wind of Pentecost has never ceased to move. It flows through centuries, across cultures, within hearts. The fire that touched the disciples was not a flame of the past, but a light of eternity. It continues to burn, sometimes quietly, sometimes with force, but always with fidelity. For the Spirit of truth is not memory, but presence, not echo, but voice, not history, but continuity. The Urantia papers call this Spirit the enduring gift of the Sovereign of Nebadon, poured into all flesh, available to every soul. It does not wait in temples, nor demand mediation. It dwells within. It is the thread of continuity between resurrection and eternity, between Jesus of history and the Christ of living presence. Through it, the cross is not forgotten. The tomb is not silenced. The resurrection is not distant. All are alive, immediate, present. The Spirit of truth is also the assurance of guidance. It leads us not by dictating steps, but by awakening vision. It does not impose certainty, but cultivates trust. Its fire does not consume, but clarifies. Its wind does not scatter, but directs. This is why the age it inaugurates is not of institutions, but of intimacy, not of coercion, but of communion. It is the age in which every heart may know God directly, for the Spirit whispers, even now, you are not alone. Walk in truth, live in love. In this sense, Pentecost was less conclusion than inauguration. It marked the beginning of a world where the divine presence would no longer be localized in one place or one person, but diffused universally. The risen one became the indwelling one, multiplied across countless hearts. The Spirit of truth is the democratization of divinity, the intimacy of the infinite offered freely, without measure. Mystics have seen in this Spirit the fire of alchemy, the invisible flame that transforms everything it touches. Communities are refined, civilizations shaped, history redirected, not by force of armies, but by the quiet insistence of fidelity, the burning of love that refuses to be extinguished. The Spirit is the yeast in the dough of history, the spark in the ashes of despair, the dawn after nights of exile. Always quiet, always faithful, always present. And the age it inaugurates is still unfolding. It is not a past chapter, but a living reality, a current in which we are immersed. The Spirit of truth continues to whisper in our decisions, burn in our loves, guide our journeys. Its presence is the bridge between mortality and eternity, between fragility and fidelity, between time and timelessness. To live in this Spirit is to live already in the kingdom that is not of this world, but within it, the kingdom not of dominion, but of trust, not of fear, but of love. This is why the Spirit of truth is not only gift, but summons. It comforts, yes, but it also calls. It whispers peace, but it also burns away illusion. It assures us we are loved, but it also compels us to embody that love. It is Jesus alive in us, not only as memory, but as mission. To receive the Spirit is to become the continuation of His presence, the embodiment of His fidelity, the vessel of His light. Thus, the age of the Spirit is not finished. It is eternal. It stretches beyond Pentecost, beyond history, into the fabric of forever. For the Spirit of truth is not merely companion of time, but presence of eternity. And in living within it, we already taste what cannot die. We already breathe what has no end. We already burn with a flame no shadow can quench. The chapter closes then, not with an ending, but with widening. From cross to resurrection, from resurrection to spirit, and from spirit to eternity. The path is seamless. The God who once walked with us now walks within us. The age of the Spirit is not tomorrow, but now. Not elsewhere, but here. Not temporary, but eternal. And so, the way is open for the final invitation, the epilogue. For the story of incarnation, cross, resurrection, and Spirit is not a tale to admire, but a truth to embody. The God who walked with us calls us now to walk with Him, to live as temples of His presence, to embody what cannot die. Chapter 13, The Cosmic Christ. When we speak of Jesus of Nazareth, we speak of a man rooted in time, walking dusty roads, eating with friends, praying beneath olive trees, dying upon a Roman cross. Yet when we speak of the Christ, we're drawn into a horizon that cannot be confined to Palestine, to the first century, or to the limits of history. The Christ is larger than time, deeper than culture, vaster than creed. He is the manifestation of the eternal Son, the reflection of the infinite Father, the presence that burns quietly in every soul through the indwelling adjuster. The Urantia papers affirm this distinction. Jesus is the historical incarnation, the bestowal of Michael of Nebadon, while Christ represents the eternal Logos, the revelation of sonship that permeates the universe. The life of Jesus was the door through which the cosmic Christ was unveiled to humanity. What began in Bethlehem and culminated at Golgotha was more than a story. It was a window into reality itself, a glimpse of the fullness that sustains creation. Teilhard de Chardin intuited this mystery when he spoke of the cosmic Christ as the omega point, the destiny toward which all evolution converges. For him, the Christ was not confined to a single religion or historical age, but was the living energy at the heart of matter, the axis of becoming, the unifying center of consciousness. In Christ, the fragments of creation are gathered, the chaos of history finds meaning, and the long arc of evolution bends toward unity. The resurrection revealed not only victory over death, but also the opening of this cosmic horizon. Simone Weil, in her mystical clarity, expressed another dimension of this truth. For her, the essence of communion with the divine was attention, the pure turning of the soul toward what is real. To attend without distraction, without self, is to pray. In this sense, the cosmic Christ is discovered not only in galaxies and convergences, but also in the silence of attention. He is the universal consciousness that floods creation, and yet he is the whisper met in stillness, the flame unveiled when the soul attends fully to the presence within. Thus, the cosmic Christ is both transcendent and immanent. He holds galaxies together, yet he also abides in the secret chamber of the heart. He is the axis of history, yet he also transcends history. He is the Logos through whom all things were made, and he is the spirit of truth poured into every conscience. To name him is to name the unity of creation, the bridge between finite and infinite, the fullness where all opposites converge. The historical Jesus reveals the face of the Father. The cosmic Christ reveals the destiny of creation. To follow him is not only to imitate a man of Galilee, but to align with the current of the universe, to yield to the movement that draws all things into communion. Every act of love participates in this movement. Every surrender to truth is alignment with this current. The cosmic Christ is not distant ideal, but present reality, always summoning creation into its fullness. This vision expands the meaning of incarnation. The Bethlehem child was not the beginning of Christ, but his unveiling. The cosmic Christ was already present in the stars that sang, in the atoms that danced, in the consciousness that stirred in ancient seekers. In Jesus, this eternal presence took flesh, spoke words, healed wounds, carried a cross. Yet beyond Jesus, the Christ remains, universal, cosmic, eternal. To contemplate the cosmic Christ is to awaken to our place within this vastness. We are not isolated fragments wandering through meaningless void. We are sparks of the same fire, threads of the same tapestry, notes of the same song. The adjuster within us is the guarantee of this truth, the fragment of divinity anchoring us to the infinite. To heed its whisper is to awaken to the Christ already dwelling within, calling us into the unity that is our destiny. Thus, the Christ we encounter is not bound to a church, a creed, or a century. He belongs to the cosmos, and we belong to him. He is the fullness in which galaxies swirl, the unity toward which consciousness grows, the presence that sustains each breath. To discover him is to discover that our lives are not accidents, but pilgrimages, not isolated but interwoven, not fleeting but eternal. The historical Jesus leads us into the cosmic Christ. The cosmic Christ draws us into the eternal Father. This is the path of fullness, to begin in history, to awaken in universality, to rest in eternity. The vision of the cosmic Christ invites us to see unity where once we saw only fragments. Science maps the vastness of galaxies. Mysticism listens to the silence of the soul. Philosophy seeks meaning in the currents of history. And yet, all of them converge when viewed through the lens of the Christ who transcends yet inhabits them all. The cosmic Christ is the axis where matter and spirit, time and eternity, individual and universal, meet in harmony. Teilhard de Chardin envisioned Christ as the omega point, the gravitational center of creation. Evolution, for him, was not random wandering but purposeful ascent, drawn by love toward a unifying center. Biological processes, cultural growth, the expansion of consciousness, all find their consummation in Christ, the cosmic magnet pulling creation into wholeness. In this light, science does not oppose faith but expands it, revealing the immensity of the canvas upon which the Christ paints his unity. Every atom that fuses every star that is born, every consciousness that awakens, all are part of the same cosmic liturgy. Mystics across traditions echo this intuition. Sufis speak of the beloved who is nearer than breath. Hindus perceive the divine self within as the eternal witness. Taoists describe the way, the flow in which all things harmonize. Christian mystics behold Christ as pleroma, the fullness that fills all in all. Each language is different, yet the truth is shared. The universe is not chaos but communion, not emptiness but presence. And at its heart burns the Christ, cosmic and eternal, holding all things in unity. Simone Weil's insight into attention as prayer adds yet another dimension. To attend, to gaze without distraction, without self-seeking, is to enter communion with reality itself. In that gaze, one discovers not separation but unity, not isolation but belonging. The cosmic Christ is met precisely in such attention, for he is the reality that holds all. To attend fully to the world, to the neighbor, to the silence of the heart, is to touch the Christ who pervades them all. The Urantia papers affirm this vision by pointing to the universal reach of the Son. Jesus revealed the Father's love in one time and place, but the Christ is eternal, the Son of God present in every corner of creation. The Spirit of truth, poured out at Pentecost, multiplies his presence endlessly so that no one is far from him. In the adjuster dwelling within, each person carries the seed of this cosmic unity, the whisper of the Christ drawing all into fullness. This vision reshapes our understanding of humanity. We are not isolated creatures adrift in an indifferent cosmos. We are participants in a vast symphony, co-creators with God, destined to awaken into communion. The cosmic Christ binds our individuality to the universal without erasing it. Just as a note is not lost in a symphony, but finds its meaning within the whole. Our uniqueness matters, yet it matters most when offered into unity. Such a vision also transforms how we see history. Wars, divisions, and chaos appear as fractures, yet even these can be woven into a greater tapestry. The Spirit of truth continues to guide evolution, both biological and cultural, toward higher consciousness. The cosmic Christ does not erase struggle, but redeems it, turning even suffering into a pathway toward communion. What seems broken in isolation finds its healing when viewed from the perspective of the whole. Here, faith and science cease to be adversaries. Science uncovers the grandeur of galaxies, the intricacy of life, the depth of consciousness. Faith discerns in that grandeur a direction, in that intricacy a meaning, in that depth a presence. Together, they reveal a Christ who is not small or parochial, but vast and universal. The Christ who healed lepers and blessed children is the same Christ who holds galaxies in place, the same logos through whom all things exist. To recognize this is to expand consciousness itself. It is to live no longer as atomized beings, but as participants in a cosmic body, a body whose head is the Christ. Teilhard called this the new sphere, the sphere of thought, consciousness, and spirit encircling the planet, growing ever more connected, ever more united. The cosmic Christ is the heart of this new sphere, the pulse drawing all minds into communion with divine purpose. Thus, the cosmic Christ is not distant but immediate. He is in the stars that blaze, in the atoms that bind, in the hearts that love. He is the fullness that gathers fragments, the unity that heals division, the presence that turns history toward destiny. To awaken to him is to see science, mysticism, and faith not as competing languages, but as harmonies of a single song. The song of unity, the hymn of love, the symphony of the cosmos. The vastness of galaxies, the grandeur of evolution, the sweep of history, all point to the cosmic Christ. Yet the truest discovery of this Christ is not only in stars or epochs, but within. For the same presence that sustains constellations whispers in the secret chamber of the soul. To seek him outwardly without recognizing him inwardly is to see only half of the truth. The Christ who unites the universe is also the Christ who calls each person by name. The Urantia papers teach that the adjuster, the fragment of the Father dwelling within, is the inner witness to this reality. It is through this indwelling presence that the cosmic Christ becomes personal, that the universal logos becomes intimate. The adjuster guides not by force, but by suggestion, not by command, but by inspiration. In every moment of choice for truth, every act of compassion, every surrender to love, the soul aligns with the Christ who already dwells within. The infinite becomes tangible in the small fidelity of daily life. Simone Weil called this attention the act of gazing without distraction or self upon what is real. To attend is to pray, she said. In attending, the ego dissolves, the noise recedes, and reality is revealed. It is here, in the silent gaze, that the Christ is discovered, not as abstraction, but as presence. He does not shout, he whispers. He does not force, he invites. The cosmic Christ is not an idea to be grasped, but a presence to be received. Mystics have borne this testimony across traditions. The Sufi enters stillness and encounters the beloved nearer than breath. The Buddhist discovers in deep meditation the luminous ground of being. The Christian contemplative recognizes Christ as indwelling light, the flame that warms and guides. These are not competing experiences, but variations of the same truth. The Christ of galaxies is the Christ of hearts, and the universe is mirrored in the soul. This encounter transforms daily life. The Christ is not found only in temples or texts, but in the neighbor who suffers, the stranger who hungers, the friend who rejoices. Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. The cosmic Christ is hidden in the ordinary, waiting to be met in attention, compassion, and fidelity. To wash feet, to share bread, to forgive offense. These become acts of cosmic communion. The eternal logos is revealed in gestures of simple love. The adjuster within continually draws the soul toward this recognition. Each time we choose truth over deception, love over fear, fidelity over compromise, we align with the current of the cosmic Christ. These are not small acts. They are cosmic acts, ripples in the ocean of eternity. For the Christ is not only the end of history, but the companion of each step, the breath in each prayer, the presence in each act of surrender. Teilhard's vision of evolution converging into Christ finds its intimate echo here. The grand convergence of galaxies mirrors the daily convergence of the heart into unity with the indwelling Christ. The new sphere he described, the sphere of collective consciousness, is not only global but personal. It begins when one's soul awakens to the Christ within, when attention turns to presence, when surrender yields to love. From such awakenings, the whole of humanity is transformed. This inner discovery also reveals the paradox of individuality and universality. The cosmic Christ gathers all into unity, yet in him no soul is dissolved. Just as a symphony is richer for each distinct instrument, so the Christ is fuller for each unique soul. To awaken to him is not to lose oneself, but to find oneself more deeply. The adjuster within does not erase personality, but completes it, shaping it into harmony with the eternal. And so, the cosmic Christ is not distant dream, but immediate reality. He is closer than breath, more intimate than thought, more present than we dare to believe. To discover him is to discover that eternity is already here, that heaven begins in attention, that the vast cosmos is mirrored in the quiet fidelity of the soul. Thus the path inward is also the path outward. To attend to the Christ within is to participate in the Christ who sustains galaxies. To live with fidelity in daily choices is to align with the Omega toward which all history moves. The small and the vast, the ordinary and the cosmic, the intimate and the eternal, all converge in him. The cosmic Christ is not only to be contemplated, but to be lived. In silence, in service, in surrender, we embody the unity he reveals. And in that embodiment, the universe itself becomes luminous, for we have discovered what cannot die, what cannot be broken, what cannot be lost, the Christ, eternal and cosmic, alive within us. The vision of the cosmic Christ draws the threads of history, mysticism, and science into a single tapestry of meaning. In him, the fragments of our lives are gathered, the struggles of humanity are dignified, the vastness of galaxies is embraced. He is the fullness that unites, the center that holds, the destiny that calls. To contemplate him is to realize that nothing stands alone, no soul, no culture, no star. All belong, all are woven, all are sustained in him. Teilhard de Chardin saw this as the Omega point, the consummation of evolution, the final blossoming of creation into unity. But the Omega is not only future, it is already present, drawing us even now. Each act of love is already a fragment of Omega. Each surrender to truth is already a step into fullness. Each heart that awakens to the adjuster within is already participating in the cosmic Christ. Eternity does not wait at the end of time. It pulses in every moment, waiting to be recognized. Simone Weil, with her luminous clarity, reminds us that attention itself is participation in this reality. To turn one's gaze without distraction, without self, is to enter into communion with the Christ who sustains all. In every act of pure attention, the boundaries between self and world blur, and what remains is presence. This presence is Christ, not only the figure of history, but the consciousness of the cosmos, the eternal logos who breathes through all. The Urantia papers confirm this universality. Paper 195 insists that Jesus revealed not a parochial faith, not a tribal deity, but the universal Father and the eternal Son. The Christ we meet in history is the same Christ who pervades the universe. His spirit of truth is not limited by language, creed, or time. It burns wherever hearts are open. The cosmic Christ belongs not to one people, but to all creation, for he is the very pattern of creation itself. To live in this awareness is to live differently. It is to see every neighbor as fragment of the same tapestry, every stranger as companion in the same pilgrimage, every act of love as cosmic insignificance. It is to recognize that the Christ who walked in Galilee is also the Christ who breathes in our prayers, who shines in the stars, who guides the evolution of consciousness. Life ceases to be random or fractured. It becomes liturgy, a hymn of communion. This vision also redefines destiny. Death is no longer abyss, but passage. Individuality, no longer isolation but contribution, history no longer chaos but symphony. The cosmic Christ is the guarantee that no effort of fidelity is wasted, no act of compassion is lost, no surrender to love is in vain. Everything is gathered, everything is remembered, everything is fulfilled in him. Thus, the Christ is Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, but also the eternal presence in between. He is the child in Bethlehem and the sovereign of Nebadon, the healer in Galilee and the light of galaxies, the crucified in Jerusalem and the eternal Logos. To know him is to live in the fullness of unity, to discover that the God who walked with us is the same God who walks within us and sustains the universe. The chapter closes with invitation, not merely to admire the cosmic Christ, but to embody him, to align thought with truth, to attend with stillness, to act with love. These are the ways we incarnate the Christ in the world. For the Christ is not distant goal, but living presence, not abstract doctrine, but eternal companion. He calls us into unity, into fidelity, into fullness. And so the way is prepared for the epilogue. After the descent into history, the journey through surrender, cross, resurrection, and spirit, and the unveiling of the cosmic Christ, the final word remains. The God who walked with us still walks. He is not only memory, but presence, not only symbol, but reality, not only teacher, but companion. He is the fullness that cannot be lost, the light that cannot be extinguished, the Christ who is cosmic and eternal. Chapter 14, the return to the inner temple. The journey through history and cosmos finds its culmination not in the stars above, but in the sanctuary within. After contemplating the vastness of galaxies, the sweep of evolution, the mystery of resurrection, and the fire of spirit, the invitation returns to something startlingly simple, to dwell in the temple of the heart. For the ultimate revelation of the Christ is not merely cosmic grandeur, but intimate presence. The God who walked with us, the Christ who transcends time, seeks now to be incarnated in the rhythms of daily life. The Urantia papers declare that the supreme experience of faith is the realization of God within the soul. It is not in distant heavens or ritualized spaces that the Father's presence is most clearly encountered, but in the quiet chamber of human consciousness. This is the inner temple, where the adjuster whispers, where the spirit of truth illuminates, where Christ becomes not merely memory, but presence. The true sanctuary is built not of stone, but of attention, not of ritual, but of fidelity, not of grandeur, but of surrender. Rumi sang of this temple, "Do not seek for God outside yourself. He is not in a distant place, he is in your heart. Enter there, and you will see the beloved." The mystic's words echo across centuries, resonating with the testimony of saints and sages. The divine is not elsewhere, it is here. To return to the inner temple is to discover that every breath, every gesture, every act can be sacramental. Life itself becomes liturgy when lived in the presence of the Christ within. Viktor Frankl, writing from the crucible of suffering, affirmed this same truth from another angle. In the camps, stripped of everything, he discovered that the last of human freedoms is the power to choose one's attitude, to affirm meaning even in despair. This is the temple no tyrant can desecrate, no suffering can destroy. To live from this inner sanctuary is to embody the Christ who endured, who chose fidelity even on the cross, who revealed that meaning is not destroyed by pain, but transfigured through love. The return to the inner temple is thus both mystical and practical. Mystical because it requires silence, attention, surrender to presence. Practical because it transforms the way we work, eat, speak, forgive, and love. It means seeing the Christ in the neighbor who irritates us, the stranger who needs us, the family that burdens and blesses us. It means transforming the ordinary into sacrament, washing dishes as service, walking streets as pilgrimage, sharing bread as communion. The sacred does not need to be sought elsewhere. It shines in the familiar when attended to with fidelity. The adjuster within guides this transformation. Each moment of choosing love over fear, truth over deceit, service over self, is a step into the temple. We do not need to flee the world to find God. We need only to open the door of the heart. The Christ who fills galaxies is the same Christ who waits in silence within us, ready to transform the mundane into the eternal. Thus, the inner temple is not escape, but engagement. It does not draw us away from life, but plunges us deeper into it. When the Christ is discovered within, the world itself becomes radiant. The neighbor's face is icon. The child's laughter is hymn. The act of work is prayer. To live in this way is to incarnate the cosmic Christ in flesh, to become temple not of stone, but of living presence. The invitation, then, is not simply to admire the Christ, nor only to contemplate him, but to embody him, to let his presence shape the choices of today, the gestures of love, the attentions of silence. In doing so, we return to the temple that was never lost, the sanctuary that always stood within. The Christ is not only above us or beyond us, but within us, waiting to be lived. The inner temple reveals itself most clearly not in moments of ecstasy, but in the fabric of daily life. It is in the gestures so small they are often overlooked that the Christ within is most authentically embodied. For the sacred is not reserved for altars. It pulses in kitchens, marketplaces, hospitals, schools, in the quiet routines of morning and in the weary sighs of night. To awaken to this truth is to discover that every day is liturgy, every action a sacrament, every breath a prayer. The Urantia papers remind us that Jesus spent more than 2/3 of his life in ordinary labor, long before his public ministry. He learned patience as a child, diligence as a carpenter, humility in anonymity. These years were not wasted, but essential. They taught that the divine is not only revealed in miracles, but in faithfulness to common tasks. The Christ of history dignified the ordinary, making daily life itself the ground of revelation. To return to the inner temple is to see our own daily lives in this light. Nothing is trivial when done in love. Rumi's image of the heart as temple becomes practical in this sense. The temple is not accessed only in moments of withdrawal, but in acts of presence. To listen fully to another is to step into the sanctuary. To forgive is to sweep the temple floor. To cook with gratitude is to light incense before the altar. The heart, when turned toward love, transforms every task into worship. The beloved does not demand grand displays. He asks for fidelity in the small, the hidden, the daily. Viktor Frankl's witness amplifies this truth. In the most stripped and ordinary moments, waiting in line, carrying stones, enduring hunger, he discovered that meaning could still be chosen. The temple was not an external comfort, but an internal orientation. Even the smallest decision, to share bread, to encourage another, to hold hope, became act of sacred defiance, affirmation of life in the face of death. This is the inner temple alive, the capacity to infuse meaning into the seemingly meaningless, to embody the Christ in the unnoticed. To live this way is to recognize the extraordinary in the ordinary. The smile exchanged in passing becomes blessing. The effort to remain honest in a corrupt system becomes sacrifice. The patience offered to a child becomes psalm. The embrace of a friend becomes Eucharist. Life ceases to be divided between sacred and secular. Everything is drawn into unity. The Christ who fills galaxies now fills the day's smallest corners. The Spirit of truth assists in this recognition. It does not only speak in lofty revelations, but in subtle nudges. The call to speak kindness rather than harshness, to pause in gratitude rather than rush in anxiety, to notice beauty where others see only monotony. Each of these whispers is an opening into the temple, a reminder that holiness is always near. The fire of Pentecost does not burn only in upper rooms. It burns in kitchens, offices, and streets. This awareness reshapes the way we understand discipleship. To follow Christ is not only to preach or to serve publicly, but to embody presence in the daily. It is to transform errands into pilgrimage, conversations into prayers, chores into offerings. Fidelity to truth is not measured by grandeur, but by constancy. In this constancy, the temple is built stone by invisible stone in the heart of every believer. And so, the call is to return again and again in the middle of life to this temple, not by fleeing the world, but by inhabiting it with love, not by waiting for grand opportunities, but by sanctifying the present moment. The Christ is already there in the dust of the street, in the laughter of the child, in the burden of work, in the silence of night. To attend to him is to discover that daily life itself is the altar upon which eternity is offered. The inner temple is not only the place of joy and peace, it is also the sanctuary where suffering is transfigured. For the Christ who dwells within does not shield us from pain, but gives it meaning. The cross revealed this mystery, that fidelity can endure even when hope seems lost, that love can remain even when surrounded by hatred, that meaning can be discovered even in anguish. The temple of the heart becomes strongest, not when life is easy, but when it trembles beneath the weight of trial. Viktor Frankl bore witness to this paradox. Amid hunger, despair, and cruelty, he discovered that suffering could be borne when it was imbued with meaning. One could not always choose circumstances, but one could choose one's response. This freedom of inner orientation is the altar that cannot be desecrated. In the camps, he learned that the sacred was not obliterated by brutality. It was intensified by it. The choice to love, to hope, to endure, this was the act of worship in the darkest sanctuary. The Urantia papers likewise remind us that suffering is not meaningless, nor is it punishment. It is woven into the experience of growth, of choosing truth and love in a world where shadows exist. Even Jesus, the sovereign of Nebadon, endured misunderstanding, rejection, and crucifixion. His inner temple was never broken, even when his body was. He revealed that communion with the Father remains possible in every condition, and that fidelity transforms even death into passage. Rumi echoes this truth in poetic clarity. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Pain, far from being the end of meaning, can become the opening into deeper communion. The inner temple is often discovered most vividly in the cracks of life, where illusions collapse and the soul can no longer pretend to self-sufficiency. In those moments, the Christ within whispers, "You are not alone. Even here, I dwell with you." This truth reshapes how we face our own trials. Illness, loss, disappointment, betrayal. Each can become threshold into the inner temple, not by denying pain, but by entering it with presence. The Christ does not erase suffering, but shares it. He does not explain away mystery, but dwells in it. When we bring our anguish into the inner temple, it is not silenced, but transfigured. It becomes part of the offering, the incense of fidelity rising into eternity. Such fidelity is not stoicism, but trust. Stoicism endures by hardening. The temple endures by opening. To live in the inner temple is to allow tears, yet also to allow hope. It is to carry grief without losing love, to endure limitation without losing dignity. This is the worship of the wounded heart, the sacrament of the broken yet faithful life. And it is here, paradoxically, that joy is rediscovered. Not superficial joy that denies suffering, but deep joy that arises from fidelity itself. To know that even in pain, life is meaningful. Even in despair, love is real. Even in death, eternity awaits. This is joy no shadow can extinguish. The Christ within is the guarantee that suffering is never final, never wasted, never meaningless. Every tear belongs to the temple. Every wound can be transformed into doorway. Every silence can become prayer. Thus, the temple of the heart is not fragile, but indestructible. It may shake under the weight of anguish, but it will not fall, for it is built upon eternity. The Christ within is the cornerstone, the adjuster the flame, the spirit of truth the breath. And so, even in the darkest night, the temple shines. Even in the silence of despair, the beloved whispers. Even in the brokenness of life, the Christ is present. To return to this temple in suffering is to discover that we are never abandoned. The same God who walked through Galilee walks through our grief. The same Christ who bore the cross bears our sorrows. And in his presence, suffering is no longer the end, but passage, not destruction, but transfiguration. The return to the inner temple is not a journey reserved for the mystic, the sage, or the saint. It is the invitation offered to every soul in every season of life. The Christ who sustains galaxies and guides history has chosen to dwell also within the fragile walls of human hearts. He does not ask for grand achievements, but for presence. He does not demand monuments of stone, but fidelity of spirit. To live from this temple is to transform the ordinary into sacrament, the daily into eternity, the fleeting into fullness. The Urantia papers remind us that the supreme experience of religion is not ceremony, but communion, not doctrine but relationship, not distant awe but intimate presence. This temple is always open, requiring no key but attention, no ritual but surrender. In silence, it becomes radiant. In struggle, it becomes strong. In love, it becomes infinite. To live in this way is to embody the Christ not as memory, but as presence, not as idea, but as reality, not as story, but as life. Rumi's poetry resounds with this vision. There is a temple that has no walls. Open your eyes, and you will see it. Enter, and you'll find the beloved. This temple is not far. It is as close as the next breath, as near as the next act of love, as immediate as the next moment of attention. To enter it is to awaken to what was always true, that God is not only beyond us, but within us, not only transcendent, but immanent, not only infinite, but intimate. Viktor Frankl's testimony reinforces this call in practical clarity. To live with meaning even amid suffering is to inhabit the inner temple. Each choice, no matter how small, becomes liturgy. Each response to life becomes offering. Even in limitation, the soul can remain free. Even in despair, the soul can remain faithful. The temple does not close in darkness. It shines more brightly. Fidelity itself, is worship. Thus, to live in the temple is to live sacramentally. To greet a neighbor becomes benediction. To forgive an offense becomes absolution. To share bread becomes communion. To work honestly becomes Him. To endure suffering with dignity becomes offering. Every gesture is gathered into eternity, for the Christ within sanctifies them. The sacred is not elsewhere. It pulses in the now. The Spirit of truth continues to remind us of this, whispering through conscience, nudging through love, clarifying through silence. It invites us not into escape, but into embodiment. To live in the temple is not to abandon the world, but to inhabit it more fully, more faithfully, more lovingly. The world becomes altar, time becomes liturgy, and life itself becomes prayer. The call, then, is not to admire the temple, nor only to visit it, but to dwell in it, to return again and again, until presence becomes habit, fidelity becomes instinct, and love becomes our natural atmosphere. This is the life of the temple, not distant holiness, but embodied presence, not fleeting moments of inspiration, but steady rhythm of communion. And in this dwelling, we prepare for the epilogue, for the story of incarnation, cross, resurrection, spirit, and Christ's cosmic finds its fulfillment here, in the heart that becomes temple. The God who once walked with us, the Christ who now fills the cosmos, seeks to walk within us. The final word is not only to remember Him, but to embody Him, to live as temples of the eternal, to walk as vessels of His presence. The chapter closes with a summons. Enter the temple. Attend to the presence. Live as sanctuary, for the Christ is already here, closer than thought, nearer than breath, waiting to be lived. Epilogue, the God who walked with us. Memory is more than recollection. It is not merely the act of looking backward to a figure who once walked in distant lands. True memory is alignment with presence, a remembrance that awakens reality here and now. To remember Jesus of Nazareth is not to confine Him to history. It is to recognize that the God who once walked with us still walks, but now within us. Memory becomes participation, and participation becomes transformation. The Urantia papers remind us that Jesus' life was not simply the story of a man, but the revelation of God's nature, unveiled in flesh. His footprints in Galilee are long erased from the dust, but His presence has never departed from the earth. Through the Spirit of truth, through the indwelling adjuster, through the cosmic Christ who sustains the universe, He continues to walk. What began as history has become eternity. What appeared as past becomes present. What seemed to end in death blooms into endless life. The Gospel of Thomas speaks to this reality. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The Christ within is not a distant presence to be admired, but a living presence to be revealed. The task of memory is not nostalgia, but embodiment. The true disciple is not one who speaks endlessly of what Jesus did, but one who allows the same Spirit to live again in thought, word, and deed. Theosophy echoes this summons with the vision of the inner Christ. Each human being carries within a spark of divinity, a fragment of eternal flame. To awaken, it is to discover alignment with the whole, to live not as isolated ego, but as child of the living God. The Christ who walked among us seeks to be born within us. The story of incarnation repeats itself in every heart that yields to love, in every conscience that surrenders to truth. The manger of Bethlehem is not only a memory, but a symbol. Each soul is cradle for the eternal. Mystics across traditions affirm this truth. Augustine confessed, "God is more intimate to me than I am to myself." Rumi sang of the beloved dwelling in the chamber of the heart. Eastern sages pointed to the self that is deeper than thought, more enduring than circumstance. These voices converge in a single chorus. The divine is not only beyond but within, not only transcendent but immanent, not only cosmic but intimate. To remember this is to awaken, to align, to embody. Thus, the God who walked with us does not ask merely to be remembered in books, liturgies, or monuments. He asks to be lived in our choices, to be incarnated in our relationships, to be present in our presence. He is memory transfigured into reality, remembrance blossoming into embodiment. To recall him is to feel his steps in our own, to let his compassion flow through our gestures, to let his fidelity shape our path. This remembrance is not abstraction, but summons. It calls us to align our hearts with truth, our minds with light, our wills with love. It is not enough to admire Christ. We are invited to live him. The epilogue of his story is not written in parchment, but in the lives of those who awaken. The God who walked with us desires to walk again, through us, in us, as us. And so memory becomes alignment. We look back not to chain ourselves to the past, but to awaken to the eternal present. The footprints of Jesus in Galilee remind us that divinity walked in human form. The footprints we leave today reveal that he still walks when we choose to embody him. Memory is not closure, but continuation, not farewell, but fidelity. To remember the God who walked with us is to realize that he has never left. To align with the God who walked with us is to awaken to the truth that the temple of his presence is no longer built with stones, but with lives. The cathedral is the heart. The altar is the conscience. The liturgy is the rhythm of daily choices. To live as temple is to let the Christ who once walked among us now walk within us, shaping the ordinary in a sacred offering. The Urantia papers affirm that true religion is not bound by ritual or dogma, but is expressed in the living experience of faith. That experience is alignment, the steady turning of the heart toward God, moment by moment, choice by choice. It is not dramatic ecstasy, but quiet fidelity, pausing to forgive when anger tempts, choosing honesty when deceit beckons, loving when indifference feels easier. These small choices are bricks of the inner temple, silent acts of worship where the Christ becomes incarnate again. The Gospel of Thomas gives this truth its sharp clarity. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are sons of the living Father. To know oneself is not merely to trace personality or memory, but to awaken to the divine flame within. Alignment is this awakening, the recognition that the God who walked with us is already the God who dwells in us. To live in such awareness is to become transparency. The Christ shines through gestures, words, and even silences. Theosophy calls this the unveiling of the inner Christ, the birth of divinity in the human vessel. It is not an event of the past, but a continuous unfolding, a rebirth in every heart that consents. The same logos that shaped galaxies and took flesh in Jesus desires to be revealed again. In each soul, in each act, in each moment of surrendered love. To align is to say yes to this unveiling, to let the Christ speak through our silence, act through our compassion, breathe through our lives. Mystics have long testified that such alignment is not achieved by effort alone, but by surrender. Rumi wrote, "Be like a reed flute, emptied of self, that the beloved may play his song through you. To align is to empty, not of value, but of vanity, not of essence, but of ego. In that emptiness, the Christ within becomes audible, the eternal song flows, and life itself becomes melody. The God who once walked in Galilee now walks through the surrendered heart, making of it an instrument of eternity. This alignment transforms the perception of daily life. Work ceases to be mere duty and becomes offering. Conversation becomes prayer when infused with kindness. Rest becomes trust in the Father's care. Suffering becomes passage when born in communion. Nothing is wasted, for the Christ transfigures everything he inhabits. To live in alignment is to see no division between sacred and secular, but to recognize that all belongs, all is temple, all is capable of revealing him. Viktor Frankl's witness sharpens this truth in the crucible of suffering. He discovered that even in conditions stripped of freedom, one freedom remained: to align one's attitude with meaning. This is the essence of temple living. No matter the circumstance, the Christ within can be chosen, embodied, revealed. Alignment is not escape from the world, but transformation of it. Not denial of pain, but transfiguration of it. Not withdrawal from humanity, but deeper immersion in it. Thus, the epilogue of Christ's story is written not in manuscripts, but in us. Every time we choose truth, we inscribe his presence in a history. Every time we love, we extend his incarnation. Every time we align, the God who walked with us walks again. This is the mystery of memory transformed into embodiment, of presence transfigured into participation. The invitation then is simple and immense. Live as temple. Let your choices be altars, your breath be prayer, your life be sanctuary. For the God who once walked beside fishermen and tax collectors, who ate with sinners and wept with friends, now longs to walk again. In you, through you, as you. The story of the God who walked with us does not end in Galilee, nor at Golgotha, nor in the empty tomb. It does not conclude with Pentecost, nor with the visions of mystics, nor with the testimony of saints. The story continues, now here in us. For the Christ who once entered history now seeks to enter our lives, not as a figure to admire, but as a presence to embody. The final chapter is not written in books, but in the choices of hearts awakened. The Urantia papers affirm that the supreme revelation of God is not doctrine, but life. Jesus' gift to humanity was not simply his words or even his miracles, but his embodiment of the Father's love. He showed what it looks like when divinity and humanity unite, when the eternal is lived in time. The epilogue of his story is written every time we choose to live in that same spirit. When we forgive as he forgave, serve as he served, love as he loved. The God who walked with us still walks, but through our steps. The Gospel of Thomas captures this calling. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the sons of the living Father. To know oneself truly is to discover the Christ within, to awaken to the fragment of eternity that dwells in the soul. This knowledge is not intellectual, but existential. It is realized only when lived. To know is to embody. To embody is to reveal. And to reveal is to continue the incarnation. Theosophy names this the inner Christ, the divine principle that must be born in each of us. The nativity is not only past, but perpetual. Each soul is manger, each heart Bethlehem, each life capable of bearing the eternal. To live in this awareness is to turn existence itself into epiphany. The God who once walked with us desires to walk again, clothed not in one body, but in countless lives, filling humanity with his presence. Mystics across centuries echo the same truth. God is not only to be adored, but to be lived. Augustine spoke of God as nearer than the soul itself. Rumi called the heart the temple of the beloved. Teresa of Avila wrote of the interior castle, where Christ waits in radiant silence. These are not metaphors only, but testimonies. They remind us that the presence we admire in history is the same presence waiting to shine within us. This epilogue, then, is not conclusion but invitation. It summons us to carry forward what has been revealed, to embody truth in a world of falsehood, to live love in a culture of indifference, to kindle hope in a time of despair. The Christ who once walked with fishermen and outcasts now seeks to walk through us. Students, parents, workers, dreamers, seekers. He does not wait for saints already perfected. He calls ordinary souls willing to say yes. To live this way is to turn memory into mission. It is to recognize that faith is not static belief, but dynamic embodiment. It is to let each day become gospel, each word become testimony, each act become revelation. The God who walked with us continues his journey through the roads we travel, the homes we inhabit, the lives we touch. In us, his presence finds new expression, new incarnation, new epilogue. And so the call goes forth. Do not only remember him, live him. Do not only admire his light, become bearers of it. Do not only recite his story, write it anew with your life. For the God who walked with us has not left. He waits to walk again, through your hands, your words, your choices. This is the mystery and the summons. History is not closed. Eternity is not distant. Christ is not absent. He is here, within you, before you, beyond you. He is memory transfigured into presence, presence transfigured into embodiment, embodiment transfigured into eternity. The epilogue is not the end. It is the beginning of your story with him. And now, beloved soul, the path rests in your hands. You have walked through incarnation and cross, through resurrection and spirit, through cosmos and inner temple. But the story is not finished. It continues wherever love is lived, wherever truth is chosen, wherever Christ is embodied. Carry this light within you. Let it guide your steps, soften your words, steady your heart. For the God who walked with us still walks. Through you, through me, through all who awaken to his presence. And if you enjoyed this content, please comment where you're from, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Every day we bring new videos to nourish the soul.